Welcome to Let's Talk, a podcast about life, leadership, and making disciples. Let's Talk is brought to you by the North Central region of the Missionary Church, where we want to empower everyday people to love like Jesus and live like missionaries. To find out more about our events and ministries, go to mcncr.org.
Thanks so much for listening to the Let's Talk podcast. My name is Kevin Moore. I'm your host, and right here at Let's Talk, we want to help you live better, lead better, and make more disciples. And one of the ways that we want to help you lead better, one of the ways we want to help you live better, one of the ways that we want to help you make more disciples is we are hosting a conference called Elevate. It's a church leadership conference, and our keynote speaker coming and doing 2 sessions is Carrie Newhoff. Now, Carrie is going to be doing a session on leading through change, which I think is massively important for us as leaders to take our church and take our people from where they are to where God wants them to be. And he's going to be helping you as a leader begin to lead through change at your local church. But also the second keynote that he's going to be giving is he's going to be talking about AI and the future of the church, specifically 3 critical shifts that every church needs to make. And here's why he's talking about this. It's because the AI era very well may be the greatest disruption that the church has ever faced. But it's also, on the flip side of that, it's also one of the greatest opportunities that we have to reach more people. The truth is, this disruption, it isn't just coming. It's whether we like it or not, it's here. And the question is whether or not your church and you as a leader are ready. So what Carrie's going to do is he's going to come to this conference and he's going to outline 3 shifts that every church leader, yes, including you, needs to make right now in order to get ready for ministry in the era of AI. Because the truth is, I think as the world becomes more artificial, this is our opportunity to become more human and more Christ-like. So listen, go to mcncr.org and register yourself and your entire team for Elevate today. Just go to mcncr.org, click events, and you can register for the conference and come and hear Carrie do the 2 keynote sessions, but also experience all the breakouts that we have as well. It's going to be a power-packed day, and we'd love to have you and your entire team come and join us. Well, hey, today we have a special guest that I had the honor of interviewing, and this is actually a 2-part podcast. We took this conversation, we divided it up into part 1 and part 2. I had the opportunity a few weeks ago to sit down with the president of the Missionary Church, Rodney Arnold. And we talked about faith, we talked about church planting, we talked about trends that he is seeing as he's working with our churches in the Missionary Church, but also working with and rubbing shoulders with other denominational leaders and other independent leaders as well. Some trends that he's seeing. This is a very, very strong 2-part podcast. So this is part 1 with an interview with President Rodney Arnold. Grab a notebook, grab a pen, and hey, get ready to grow. Well, hey, today we're very, very honored to have a very special guest with us, the president of the Missionary Church, Rodney Arnold. And this is a gentleman that I've had the opportunity to follow from afar for a little while, but then now also in the position that I'm in, getting the opportunity to serve under him and under his leadership. And Rodney, number one, thank you for who you are as a man, as a Christ follower, and thank you for leading us well at the Missionary Church. And lastly, thank you, a lot of thank yous. Thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Truly appreciate your time.
Man, it's an honor to be here and honor to see all that God is doing in the North Central region. I'm just excited to get to see it front row and to talk about it with you a little bit today.
Well, thanks for joining us. This is a podcast that's designed really and truly for not just for pastors and church leaders, but just Christians in general, people who are wanting to learn and grow in their faith. And there's 3 things that we want to help people do, and that's number 1 is live better, number 2 is lead better, and number 3 is be more effective at making disciples, and that's individually but also corporately. And so with that in mind, we'd love to just kind of hear your heart and pick your brain a little bit, hear some of your stories. So this is something, honestly, I don't really know. I mean, we've talked quite a bit, but I don't really know your faith journey and your story of growing up and then also coming to Christ. So yeah, kind of give us a behind the scenes a little bit of how you came to Christ?
Man, that's such a good question. In fact, it's interesting. Just last night, my almost 16-year-old daughter was perusing the internet. She ran across a bio of mine somewhere, and she said, "Huh, I didn't know that part of your story." And
Mm.
it was this very thing. Man, to be honest with you, looking back, I should have never had the opportunity to know Jesus. My parents divorced when I was just 6 months old, and that set off a life of bouncing back and forth between parents and states, moved
Mm.
schools 12 times between kindergarten and eighth grade. Never
Oh
went to
my
the same school
goodness.
2 years in a row. Just a crazy, and when I look back on it, that was normal. You know, as a kid, what you go through is normal. But looking back on it now, especially as a parent, it's like, wow, there should have been no reason
Wow.
that God called me, but He did. And what it really hinges on is I'm thankful for a godly, faithful grandmother. So in my earliest years, from the time my parents divorced until almost 6 years old, I essentially lived with my grandmother and grandfather in the mountains of southwestern Virginia, there on the Virginia-Tennessee border. And she was just a faithful Christ follower. She had been through so much pain in her own life that only Jesus had sustained her, the loss of two children. And she comes from a large family, a lot of just pain that comes from being in a close, tight-knit family and suffering loss and tragedy. And I saw her faith. And for me as a young child, from like 3 to 5 years old, we were the Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night
Yep.
church goers. Just, I mean, it's just what we talked about at home. She was a seamstress, but like a commercial seamstress. She sewed for LL Bean Company, and she was going to the factory every day and then would come home and take a week of vacation to be the church camp cook. And that was just the
Wow.
air that I breathed in my earliest years, is faithful Christ followers, faithfully serving the church. And when I was not quite 6 years old, I then did, though, move to live with my mother, who had recently started attending a church plant in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I remember thinking it was the weirdest thing. She said we were going to church, but it's at a hotel and there's not pews. There's these little, 18-inch wide chairs. And it was fascinating. And soon after, that church moved into a horse barn.
Moving up.
They bought a horse. Yeah, they're moving on up like we do in the church plant world. And I remember there was a Sunday that they had an amazing children's ministry for a small church plant. And in the children's church, they just presented the gospel.
Mm.
And I think those years of investment, even as young as I was, I remember vividly that moment of, I need to surrender my life to Jesus. It was almost as if I could see, this is why Nanny, as I called her, this is why my nanny is the way she is. This is why
Mm.
she has such faith. This is why we just do what we do in our family. And I need Jesus. And so
How
I
old were
surrendered
you?
my life. I was 5, almost 6, which,
Yeah.
Kevin, to be honest with you, has been a struggle throughout as I grew. Like, was that real?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awfully young. And did I really understand? But man, I see how the Lord grew me. And this, not that there was like a second experience or anything like that, but as you grow and you have those opportunities to continually surrender.
Yeah.
For me, a major crisis in faith was after college. I've got my dream job working in public relations in NASCAR, one of the youngest in the industry. The sky was really the limit. God had opened doors there for me. Yet I was leading worship at this church in Knoxville, Tennessee, driving 2 hours on the weekends. And that's where my heart and passion was. And my calling really became, again, it's not a second experience of grace, but kind of that adult experience of, am I really surrendered? Is Jesus just my Savior, or is He also my Lord?
Yeah.
Because I'm going to walk away from what I got my degree in, what my car salesman dad was proud of,
Mm.
living at home, making good money with no bills, and I'm going to walk in there and say, I'm leaving this. I'm gonna follow God's calling. So the Lord really used all of those experiences, the faith of a grandmother, being part of this church plant. That this was the early '90s. This was late '80s. This was before contemporary was a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were doing innovative ministry, planted a campus. I didn't know that's what it was, but our family was part of the launch team of a campus plant. So seeing church planting happen and just the world I grew up in, and then being called into ministry, and that was a church replant. Again, I had none of these terms at
Hmm.
21, 22 years old, but being called to help replant this church in Knoxville, Tennessee, and then that being the church that would plant us. So I really feel like I identify with Paul talking about that I'm working out my salvation with fear and trembling. There
Mm.
was that moment of surrender at almost 6 years old. Got baptized with my mother, very cool experience as she came to faith as an adult. but then seeing the Lord really just grow me and sanctify me and take me through challenges that forced me to go deeper in him as my Lord, not just my Savior.
Yeah. Man, you got my mind going. It's amazing that you had church planting literally part of your experience coming to Christ, and now you end up, which we'll get in a little bit, obviously, planting churches and overseeing a denomination that you have a huge, it's just really cool how God planted those seeds that were going to bear a great fruit in your life later on at that super young age. And also too, it makes me think about just the importance of in these small churches, large churches all over, you know, there's people working in that kid ministry behind the scenes that you may have known of, may not have known of, but they have this unbelievable effect on your life, and the importance of just as a person rolling your sleeves up where you are and serving has literally an eternal impact on thousands of people in this little small church.
For sure. Man, you're speaking on one of my passions, man. I remember hearing of the church in Washington, D.C., who had a vision for planting a church off of each major subway stop and thinking, man, that's so cool. But my heart and my experience was really in more of the rural context.
Yeah.
Even where I am in Knoxville, Tennessee, it's a growing, some would call it urban center, but the suburbs just out of town are very rural. I mean, you'll pass horse farms and cow fields, and my mind began to go to, okay, who's going to go plant a church in Maynardville, Tennessee? You know, who's going to go plant the church in middle of nowhere, Indiana? And so we don't have subways, but what if it was off of every exit, or what if it was in every incorporated, community? Because you're right, Kevin, it was in this small church surrounded by cow fields, literally. I mean, you would get out of the car and smell the manure, and there's corn as far as the eye can see. And dairy cows and all this. Yet there was a faithful ministry to that community that poured into me. But I also got to see this pastor who, he was a bus driver in the holler. So I mean, that's the term we use for maybe a valley. I don't know. It's an Appalachian word, but he intentionally drove the bus for the schools in that holler because that's where his church was. And he would invite those kids to come, and he would pour his light. And that's just what I saw. And then, full story, when I was 14 years old, I moved back to live with my dad, so the bouncing around, and my dad's still going to this church that I had gone to as a young child and would go to in the summers and Christmas and things like that. And that was the pastor who, actually, I wasn't even quite 14 years old yet. I remember we were at our church camp, which was toward the end of the summer, and him talking to me, who's going into freshman year of high school, and talking to the only other person close to my age at this little tiny church who was going to be a freshman in college, and saying, I need you to lead the youth ministry.
Wow.
Now, youth ministry in this church was birthed to 18 years old. So that's the youth group. If you're under 18, you're in. And I look back on that now, Kevin, and see that's where God has really driven this passion for me in this season we are in, that ministry by the next generation, not just ministry to the next generation, is so important, because that pastor saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And maybe he just needed a warm body. I don't know. But he handed me the keys and said, start this thing. And the first Wednesday night, there were, I think, 3 kids plus me, and 2 of them were my cousins. And yet that pastor and that little church believed in this opportunity to reach the holler kids, to reach those in that community. And when I left for college 4 years later, we were averaging 80 kids a night. There'd be 20 adults upstairs in prayer meeting, but lives being changed, families being changed. And the Lord used that not just for that church, not just for that community, but it planted something in me that was almost like a virus I couldn't inoculate, like that's what I want to give my life to. So I had to experiment with this, am I going to be a band director and music education degree? Am I going to do public relations? And God kept bringing me back to remember what it was like. Remember the difference that happened in your life in that church in a horse barn. Remember that community where you saw these holler kids who had never gone to church a day in their life, and the parents that came to Christ, and the multiplication that happened. And then in college, leading worship at a church where, similar story, the pastor handed me the keys at 19 years old to lead a worship ministry for a church of 40 people, and seeing that grow and impact a community. And all of that is what led me to saying at 26 years old, I think God's calling me to plant a church. It started when I was 13.
Yeah.
And so a passion for, hey, every community matters. I always think about it, one of our churches up in Bliss, Michigan. It's a township of 400 people. The church we have there will never be a mega church, but those 400 people matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
And who's the 13-year-old that's going to be the next generation? Who's the 17-year-old, the 19-year-old that we're letting preach a sermon and it's not good, but we got to let him start somewhere,
Yes.
like we got to, that's where these passions of mine that we talk about so much in our leadership circles
Yeah.
really come from, is there's opportunity there. And it starts small.
I love it. Yeah, you and I are a lot alike in many regards, but in that regard about the rule. One of the big passages in my life in Isaiah talks about how that you will inhabit desolate cities.
Yes,
You know,
amen.
the dry, the barren, the small, the village, the hamlet, and man, those people matter. Not and you, I know
Oh,
you'd
man.
agree with this. Not just because hey, there might be the next Rodney Arnold in there. But I get
No.
him. I'll get is that there's a guy who's going to end up following Jesus, and he's going to be a great dad.
Right,
And there's going to be a
absolutely.
little girl who gets a great father because of some,
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? And
It
yeah,
changes
gets
it changes family trees, man.
absolutely,
It
yeah,
changes generations. I mean, I think about that. I think about the difference my grandmother made in my life. Well, why was she that way? She had been discipled. She had been raised up in this church that was faithful to the word, faithful to mission, and it changed our family tree.
yes,
So now I have three kids that it's just the air that they breathe.
yes,
And it traces back to my grandmother who came to faith as an adult and it was discipled in a way that just made multiplication what we do. So yeah, it doesn't matter. That's why I love our mission statement so much of
hmm
empowering everyday people to love like Jesus and live like missionaries. It's the farmer. It's my grandmother sewing LL Bean backpacks and hoodies, and making a difference in the lives of the other women she spent 50 hours a week with. It really is the everyday person, and that's why it matters.
I love it. So you mentioned growing up in a church plant, coming back to that church plant, and I know a little bit of your history. Most of our listeners probably do, but there may be some that don't. You have had a church planting journey, and as president of the Missionary Church, that's something that's really on your heart as well, to be a denomination, a family of churches that plants more churches. What was your journey in getting into planting and getting into pastoring? Why
Well, man,
that?
yeah, that's a great question. I had never heard of church planting. It was honestly kind of a weird thing. Like, why would you start a church? Because growing up in a rural community in the South, there's churches on every corner.
Yeah.
There's churches in every cow field. You drive from here to your grandmother's house, you're going to pass 20. And so it was really a foreign concept for me. And it was getting involved in ministry at a church that a young pastor had recently been hired at this church of about 40 people. And the church was dead, man. I look, it's now the building that our church is in. And sometimes I go out and look, where's Ichabod? It had to have been written somewhere. Like it was
The
here.
glory of the Lord is
And
departed, man. It's out.
it's gone, man. And the pastor and I became dear friends. And we still sometimes reminisce and laugh about, like, can you believe what we dealt with in those
Uh,
early years? What I didn't know though is I saw a church being replanted and saw the new life that comes when we stop just doing tradition. We stop just going through the motions of business meetings and votes and budgets and the annual VBS because that's what we've always
mhm.
done, and really begin to what we talk about in our church planter training now, exegete the culture. What does this
Yes.
community need? How can we put our missionary hat on and take the gospel to the people? It's not just about getting them in the doors on Sundays. And so through that, just unique and creative ministries emerge. A food ministry that brought in hundreds of people each month and built relationships. We called it Backyard Bible Club. It ended up owning 2 mobile homes and a huge mobile home park a couple miles down the road.
Wow.
And really, I think a church was born there. And we just didn't call it that. But seeing lives change
So
there.
hold on now. Y'all
And
y'all bought 2 mobile homes and did
yeah,
church in it.
yeah. So we
Oh
started
man,
doing
that's
these, we called
awesome.
them backyard Bible clubs, and just saw it really, that's where exegeting the culture
Yeah.
went and did a little. I think we had a mission team come in somewhere because again, the church was dead as a doornail. So
Amazing.
we take this mission team of teenagers and they did a little week-long VBS type backyard Bible club in the community. And we saw a need and said, we can bring Jesus to these people who will probably never come to our church,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
let's take Jesus to them. So it started with, we rented one mobile home and did tutoring for the kids and did Bible studies for the people that were interested. And it turned into then purchasing the one next to it, and really ended up with a little ministry center there in that mobile home
Wow.
park that, again, most of those folks, some did, but most never made the 2 mile trip to our church, but they would come there.
Mm,
So if we had a little worship service with 20 people in that trailer, they'd come to that.
mm,
And it was amazing what we saw God do. So all of that really just created this itch for, I think this is what I'm supposed to give my life to. And about the same time, our church being essentially a replant of a very traditional church that traces its roots way back to the 1800s, we got involved with a group of church plants and replants in the community that would just meet for lunch. And as I would hear their stories and I would see what God was doing through disciples multiplying disciples and it leading to churches being born, some of those guys just took me under their wing. And so it
mm,
was really a collective effort of three churches in the city saying, okay, if you have a calling, we want to help you do this. And so at 24-ish is when I went to my pastor, I said, is this crazy? But I think I'm supposed to plant a church. And he said, no, I think we are supposed to plant a
mm.
church. And so over the next couple of years, he actually let me go off of staff to go. I served on staff at a 3-year-old church plant as their worship leader for 8 or 10 months, and then at a larger church, or vice versa. First at a larger church that was about 10 years old for a little less than a year, then at one of the church plants that was about 3 years old, because they recognized, and my pastor recognized, it's going to be a ding to our church to lose our associate pastor, but the kingdom will win by letting him get more experience and
Mm.
preparing. It was a 2-year intentional plan for me at the ripe old age of 26, which I think is nuts now when I look back on it. But I'm thankful for it. We need more of it to plant this church. And so, yeah, 12 people from those different churches gathered in my neighborhood in my house, in my living room in May of 2009, and we started One Life Church.
Wow. I mean, there's a lot of gifts there, but what a gift that senior pastor was.
Oh, it's huge.
You know,
Yeah, it was huge.
and everybody's different, but I'll just say this, a lot of times we as leaders, whether it's a marketplace business or it's, nonprofit or a church, is we're trying to, what we're doing, we know is important. We know God's got his hand in it. We want it to succeed, and we need good people. So we want to keep those people. And then there's a side to that. But then the other side of it is who is that person that's on my team? What is God doing in them? What does God want to do through them? And how can I not so much lose somebody, but how can I sow somebody? And
man,
what a
huge,
gift that
Kevin.
man was. What a gift that man was.
Because let me tell you what he was looking at is we only had a small church, even though we had grown from 40 to maybe 150 at this point on average. It's our associate pastor and worship leader who, at the time I'm single. I mean, I was lived at the church. I did everything. I did the bookkeeping. I mean, I did the small groups ministry. Yeah. But also it meant that as this launch team formed, pretty much the whole worship team's going. And 3 of our best tithers are going to be gone. And the pastor championed that.
Wow.
He recognized that it's not a loss, it's a multiplication. It's no different than whatever metaphor you want to use. I always talk about when my wife and I multiplied, it hurt. Mm-hmm. It hurt her physically. Mm-hmm. It cost me financially. I had to give up sleep. I had to give up comfort. We had to get a minivan, and we always hated minivans, swore we'd never have one, but multiplication hurts. But it's worth it.
Yes.
And, if we could take all the money we've spent on our 3 kids and imagine the trips we could have gone on and the mansion we could have built, but it's been worth it to multiply those babies. And the same is true of churches. We need more leaders recognizing what my pastor did, that we're not losing these 8 or 10 people and their service and their money and their ministry. We're multiplying the kingdom.
Yes.
And it's not going to benefit us.
Yes.
Personally. In fact, it might hurt us for a season. But what you hear in these stories, and they saw, God sends the next wave of leaders and God sends the next wave of people. And the true story of that, Kevin, is that church ended up over the next 16 years dwindling down back to 25, 30 people. But at that point, that pastor led that church to say, you know what? Our next step is we partner with our church that we gave birth to. Wow. And we, at the time, our church needed a facility. We were renting a grocery store at an astronomical rate. And he called me one day, it'll be 2 years ago here next month. And he said, hey, I think the church's name was Friendship. I think Friendship's next step is to let one life have the building. And it's not that friendship is dying, but it's the next step of friendship's legacy. And man, what a gift! And I came and celebrated their last Sunday and his last Sunday as he retired. They came on the first Sunday that One Life, I feel like, returned home. It was really cool. It's the building I met my wife in. It's the building we had our rehearsal dinner for our wedding. Like, it was really just an only God could do this full circle moment of all because, yes, that pastor and the other leaders of the church were willing to be open-handed. And man, I can just imagine and dream and have a vision for more of our churches that will say, you know what, we're not too small to multiply, and we're not going to let what we lose keep us out of fear from multiplying what God could do.
Man, you got my mind going. This is off script a little bit, but you're a church planter. I'm a church planter. There may be some people listening that are kind of wondering, am I a church planter? You know, I don't know for sure. So if you were, when you're let me ask it this way. What qualities and characteristics are typically there in a church planter? You know, whether I'm not talking about you got to be perfect or whatever, but what are some things that you've seen in yourself? And there's no silver bullet. There's no perfect person, but what are some qualities, some characteristics of a church planter that maybe somebody listening could say, hey, that might be me? But another one would be for a senior pastor or an assistant pastor to say, hey, I got this young adult in my group, and this cat he's kind of he looks a lot like what Rodney's talking about. What are some of those qualities and characteristics that we need to look for in ourselves or maybe even other people?
Great question. Well, I'm going to evade the question first and give an answer, and then I'll come back to it. Because my honest answer to that, Kevin, I think everybody, every leader, every pastor is a church planter. They're just in a different role. I think about it like being on a baseball team. Everybody is a baseball player, but some are the pitcher, some are the catcher, some sit out in right field waiting for a ball to come to them, but everybody's a baseball player. So you may not be the guy who goes and starts the new church, but my pastor was as much of a planter as I was.
100%.
Why? Because he equipped me. He gave me chances to fail. He taught me. He mentored me. He gave me keys to ministry. He developed me, and he was open-handed. So I think every one of our pastors, and every leader that's listening to this, you are a church planter. It's just, what will your role be? So what are the qualities of the one who actually steps up to the plate and swings the bat? Mm-hmm. Those are different. Yeah. And there are some pastors who they are more shepherding. They're gifted in a way of developing, mentoring, and releasing, and they aren't the entrepreneurial apostolic leader. That's okay. We need both.
Yes.
But what is that? What are the traits and qualities? I think you've already hit it, Kevin. It's really varies. Are we going to start a house church movement? That's very different. I could have never done that. That would be different. Or is it the, more what I now call traditional church planting, which sounds oxymoronic, but the one who's going to start a group in their home that grows into the high school auditorium or the hotel, banquet hall, and starts something fresh. It's usually going to be someone, number one, who has this unshakable calling. They know beyond the shadow of a doubt this is what God has called them to do. It cannot be someone who just thinks this will, I can do it better than it's done here. Mm-hmm. I always say it's someone who's running to something, not running from something. That's a huge
That's
thing
a whole
for
podcast
me.
On itself. It
is. We'll do that another day, man. And I think that's true across ministries as a whole. Are you retiring from something or retiring to something? Mm-hmm. Are you feeling called to something or just wanting to be away from something? So the first thing is there's a clear calling that this is what I'm supposed to do. I think there has to be a resiliency that has been demonstrated. That's not a preferred value, but you've seen it. Someone who has started something, led something, and they struggled, and yet they leaned on the Lord. They leaned on good counsel to do it. That leads me to my next one that I would say they have to be teachable, coachable, and humble.
Yes.
The most confident church planters are the ones that I've seen crash and burn. It's not been the humble ones. It's not been the even scared ones who go, man, I know this is what I'm called to do. Mm-hmm. I'm going to do it come hell or high water, and I'm resilient, but it scares the mess out of me.
Yes.
I think those are some of the best folks. Dan Miller, who's our VP, I always love what he says. I don't trust anyone who doesn't walk with a limp. Yeah. In other words, I want to know that you've been through it and you've seen the Lord provide. Because Kevin, it's got to be someone who stares at a balance sheet or a P&L and says, this doesn't make sense, but I've seen God provide.
Yes.
I know my God's called me to this. I'm
Yes.
going to keep to it. It's got to be someone who can stare in the face of the largest giver who wants you to do something that's opposed to the mission, the vision, the calling God's given you. And you have the confidence in the Lord where you fear God, not man, to say, I love you, brother, but that's not going to be what we do here. And I understand if this is not for you. And you watch 100,000 a year walk out the
Yes.
door, because I know that my God owns all the cattle on 1,000 hills. The coin is in the fish's mouth. We're going to be okay. The vision's not for sale. I think those are the primary things. I think oftentimes you see it in it's that person that's constantly assimilating new people to something.
Yeah.
They're just drawing people into, they're the ones that are always able to invite a friend to help out. They're always wanting, sometimes they drive pastors crazy because they're always wanting to start the new ministry, the new initiative, the new thing. They're pushing, they might have a holy discontent and they look rebellious, or they look unappeased, or they just don't have contentment. Maybe that's an opportunity to develop what is God calling you to?
Yeah.
And I just goes back to what I said a minute ago, man. I think the biggest thing is us being willing to say, not every church is for every person, not every church is for every leader. And one of the lessons I was taught early on about church planting is some people are naturally gifted by God to be scaffolding people. And you think about scaffolding in the building process, scaffolding goes up, the building gets built to a certain point, and the scaffolding comes down and goes to the next building project. And I had a mentor warn me of that in the early launch team phase of our church. You need to be ready for the fact that the people who want to help plant a church like this are normally scaffolding people. And you think they're going to be with you for life. And if you're not prepared for that, it's going to hurt you when they leave. But that's how God's wired them. That's how God's called them, is they're going to help you get this thing started. And then their gifts and talents are to go help the next thing get started.
Yes.
And it might be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. But I think all of our churches see that. The church that you have today will not be the church you have in 5 years, 10 years, and that's okay. And it's okay for me to tell my staff that. I used to tell my staff that every Monday morning when we had meetings. We're not all going to be here at this table for the rest of our lives. I want you to be okay with, and I'm okay with you saying, I think God's calling me to something else. Now, if it's from, I'm going to push you.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're just being challenged and held accountable and you don't like that, I'm gonna challenge you. But if you have a clear sense that God's calling you to something, let's champion that. So I think it's looking for those folks. They're called to something. They're resilient. They're entrepreneurial, apostolic, and they fear God, not man. Let's fan the flame in those folks and unleash them.
Man, I love it. One of the things that when you were talking about it made me think about one of my life passages in the book of Luke. It says that if you have not been faithful in that which belongs to another man, who will give you those things which is your own.
Amen.
And for those of you out there that are possibly considering church planting, one of the things that, and I know you would echo this as well, Rodney, that I would give if a little bit of advice would be, great leaders in general are very good followers.
Yes, absolutely.
To learn, I know you got something stirring in your heart, but serve your pastor's vision where you are, and eventually you'll get your own vision. Serve his volunteers, and eventually you'll get your volunteers. Be a faithful employee, a faithful team member where you are. Even though you got something else stirring in you, that's great. But if you will serve, if you haven't been faithful with that church that belongs to another person, and quote unquote, you're probably not going to get your own. And I've seen through the years a lot of church planters, man, they I gotta go, and I'm right and they're wrong, and like you said, that kind of flames out. It does. Listening to your story, you seem to be one of those guys that you served where you were. You served where you were. Now you had some stuff stirring in you for sure, but you were faithful with your senior pastor. He trusted you enough to say, "Hey, I want to help you," and that's Kevin, massive.
I think that brings us to another key point for those who wonder, is this me? Am I feeling stirred, or they think they are? It's so important. My number one question when I get to talk with guys that think they're being called to lead or plant a church is, who is affirming that in your life? Who else is seeing that? Who are you submitted to?
Yes.
Following COVID, our church, which probably had a more entrepreneurial apostolic culture than some, just because speed of the leader, speed of the team. But following COVID, everybody got to sit at home for a year and dream and imagine. And we had a season where a lot of our staff decided they wanted to go and do their own thing. I'm going to start a business. I'm going to start my own ministry. I'm going to do, and I would meet with every single one of those. And again, if you're feeling called to this, we're going to champion that. And it was a tough season for our church because with every person that departs the church staff, they take relationships with them.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was multiplying the kingdom and you're really called to this, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. But what I heard over and over, and I'm talking numerous relationships and conversations, was something to the effect of, I want to be my own boss.
Mm.
And man, has turned out to be like the biggest red flag of all. And if I could go back, I would throw myself on the railroad tracks in front of the train for those folks and say, no, 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 no. But what I do remember telling each of those that had an essence of that mindset was, you need to know something. If it looks like me, because I planted this church and I'm the lead pastor of this now, fairly large church, that I'm my own boss, you're sorely mistaken.
Yeah.
Everybody is under the authority of somebody.
Absolutely.
That's biblical. Like and it's inescapable. Everyone's accountable to someone. I'm going to submit myself and have mutual accountability with, first of all, my wife, with the other leaders and elders of this church. With the government has a lot to say about what we do with this church. I believe this is why denominational life is so crucial,
Yes.
There is wisdom in the host of many advisors. If I am so prideful that I don't think I need other people speaking into my leadership and challenging me, there's a problem. And
Yes.
part of that comes from something that I learned. It was actually in the CMTC that I attended right at the beginning of our church starting. Is every leader, the four relationships, I believe it's four, I'm going to make it my own and call it four, the four relationships every leader needs. And every leader needs a supervisor, a mentor, a coach, and a counselor. And they need to be different people. I had to wrestle with, who's my supervisor? Who am I submitting myself to that's going to hold me accountable? Who's my mentor? That's different than a supervisor. It's different than a coach. And I learned, it's healthy. I need to go to counseling every other week and have somebody who doesn't have a dog in the hunt helping me process,
Yeah, that's good.
What's happening. But man, I think that was crucial for my development, because the folks that say, I don't need any of that, I'm a lone ranger, I don't want to be under anybody's umbrella, under anyone's authority. I've never seen it work, Kevin. You probably haven't either. I mean,
No.
It just doesn't work.
No. Well, it doesn't work because it doesn't look like Jesus. I mean,
No,
Philippians
absolutely.
2. I mean, yeah. Now, you segued a little bit there, talking about surrounding yourself with people and not being a lone ranger. And at somewhere on your journey, you became part of the Missionary Church. What was that like, and why did you choose to plug in and be a part? Like myself, we planted in California, non-denominational, and then I kept hearing in my spirit, partner. You need a partner. And I started checking literally through a friend, Dave Engbrett, his church, Napanee Missionary Church. I just thought that was the name of his church. I started Googling it, and this is a whole denomination. And I was like, man, I can run with these guys. So I started to look, and that was kind of my journey in. And I've got all these reasons why this is one of the best decisions I've ever made in leadership. But for you, what was your journey like? Why the Missionary Church? Why did you choose to be a part?
That's a great question, man. I think I have a similarity in my story as well. And that is, I got great coaching along the way in the earliest days of the vision to start a church, that, don't do it alone. I mean, who's going to be my primary coach? I would say at the time, one of those pastors that I served under, he had been coached through a church planting network. And so I think I had enough of a holy fear that I don't want to mess this up. I've never done this before. I need some help. That I did the same thing, man. I just started looking into who's out there. What are the networks? What are the people that are planting churches that will help fund it? Quite frankly, but not just fund it, but help me. And so I came out of a Southern Baptist church, so we started there, and we got the maximum level of financial support. I think we were getting $2,000 a month for 2 years. That was a lot of money, especially then. And yet, what I found was, and I respect my roots a lot, but that's all we got was financial support. I didn't have coaching. I didn't have anyone to call and turn to when conflict arose. When I was about to go talk to a high school principal and make a pitch to use their auditorium and didn't know how to do it. And so I continued to look. Acts 29, Associated Related Churches, ARC. different, Liberty Baptist Fellowship out of Liberty University where I went to seminary. I mean, all these groups, like who can help us? And I was actually at a conference in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a guy that I knew who was planting a church about 30 minutes away, he said, "Hey, have you heard of the Mission Church?" is what he called it. And I said, "No, I've never heard of the Mission Church." He said, "Well, there's a guy that lives in Knoxville that he's essentially like the regional director, and they are investing heavily in church planting in the Southeast and in our city in Knoxville. You should give him a call." That guy's name was Dan Palmer, who is still leading in ministry for us today. Just a wise, great man. And I called him. And honestly, Kevin, the funny part of the story is I thought, well, maybe I'll get more money if they're investing heavily in church planting. Never saw a penny, by the way. But what he talked to me about was, we want to help you not just plant a church, but plant a church that plants churches.
Yes.
I had never heard of that. I'd never thought of that. He began to talk about disciple making, not discipleship. I mean, the church I'd been in was big on discipleship, but what that meant was when someone walks the aisle at the invitation and prays a prayer, the pastor assigns them to a one-on-one Bible study, and we go through the 12 steps of becoming a Jesus follower or whatever. And it's curriculum driven, and quite frankly, it's miserable. Usually, unless you both have the gift of teaching or intellect, then and I would have said at the time, I hate discipleship, because that's what I thought it was. But here I heard, no, it's about how do you teach your people, as we would say now, to live like missionaries. They're not just bringing people to church and hearing a sermon and hope they respond to the invitation, but you can raise up an army of people who go out into the community and they live this out. I had never honestly thought that through. Like, what could that look like? And so I was drawn to the Missionary Church's vision for multiplication. I loved that it was this, to me, and I still say this, it didn't feel like a denomination. It felt like a network. It felt like a family of churches. I mean, and here was a group of people saying, we don't care that you're 26 years old. We see God's calling and we see a vision. There's theological alignment. Let's partner together and let's do something beyond just plant this one church at this local high school. Let's reach East Tennessee for Jesus. And I loved that vision. I love the mission focus, that we're more united by our shared mission than we are divided by our theological nuance. And I said, I'm in. And so I had a commitment to my previous denomination. And part of that, it's another story maybe for another day, but we were the first church plant that the Southern Baptist had planted in Knoxville in 15 years. Because they had actually said, we're not going to plant churches anymore, because what they saw was churches came in, got the funding, and then disassociated.
Wow.
And so I said, I had to give them, we're going to be different. You give us a chance, and we're going to invest in not just our church planting, but in the next church's planting. And so we stayed dually aligned for a season. We still give a little bit to maintain that commitment. But what I saw in Missionary Church that was different was, it's not just going to throw dollars at this. We're going to coach you. We're going to partner with you. We're going to give you the resources and the coaching to be innovative and creative and do it differently. And man, I was hook, line, and sinker. I want to be part of that.
Same thing for me. And I think one of the things in hearing your story is you're the type of guy that has what I call that want to. You want to have a literal partner. You want to be involved, and so. You're going to the event, you're going to the training, you're making the extra phone call, and that's the thing I've loved about the Missionary Church is when you come in with a want to, there's people that say, yeah, come on board. We've got a place for you to go. We've got a meeting for you. We're going to follow up with you. We're going to walk alongside of you, and that's what I've found. I've found great partners that are helping me with the mission field that God's called me in. And I've absolutely loved being a part.
And Kevin, I think that's the next step for our family of churches is we have been a place for the Kevin Moores and the Rodney Arnolds to come in from the outside, because if you have the want to and we're aligned theologically, let's roll. Let's keep doing that.
Yes.
At the same time, the next step is going to be when our existing ministries and existing pastors identify the want to in their midst.
Yes.
That rather than relying on the outsiders coming in with the want to and we add them to the family, the multiplication from within the family. It's a both
inside out. Absolutely.
But there's data that backs that up. I was on a church multiplication call about a year ago with Converge, used to be the Baptist General Assembly, a denomination that has gotten focused on church planting. And what they saw was there was this boom of church planting in the early 2000s. I forget the exact numbers, Kevin, but I want to say it was like a net in the U.S. of 60,000 evangelical churches. It was pretty phenomenal. Then it drops off like a rock after that. And what they believe as they dive into the data is that boom was outsiders coming in. It was okay, the youth pastor from that church down the road. It was the guy from over here that we recruit to our organization. But what across the evangelical landscape wasn't happening was the internal development of the intentionality of churches planting churches and internal multiplication. And so it drops over the next 10 years to like, I want to, don't quote me on this, but something like 10 or 15% of that in that next decade.
Wow.
I mean, just dries up.
Wow.
And so the only hope that we have is to not just be the welcoming place for Kevin Moore, who has the want to, Rodney Arnold, and there's a host of others like us. But while we continue that, to also say, who's within us?
Yes.
You know, rather than relying on them coming from another church or another network or another denomination, who do we have in our midst, and what are we doing to intentionally identify them, develop them, and unleash them?
Wow, I love it. Well, thank you so much for listening to part 1 of our interview about faith, church planting, and trends in the local church with Rodney Arnold. I absolutely love my time with Rodney, and I have no doubt that you're walking away with this with a notebook full of things that you can begin to think about, ponder on, and then also apply to yourself and your team. Listen, if you haven't already, be sure to go to mcncr.org and register for our Elevate Conference with Carey Nieuwhof. As I said at the kickoff of this podcast, Carey's going to be talking about leading through change, but he's also going to be talking about AI in the future, 3 critical shifts that every church needs to make. This is going to be a power-packed, ministry-changing day for you and your team. So go to mcncr.org, click events, and register today. Hey, as always, hope this helps. Can't wait to speak with you next time.
Thanks for joining us for Let's Talk. If you have any questions, topics you want us to discuss, or a story you want to share, email us at info@mcncr.org.